Yes, thank you. We are recording this. We seem to have a very popular following on our YouTube channel these days and want to make sure it's available for anyone at any time. And thank you very much, Paolo, for that. So, Paolo's going to walk us through this toolkit and answer questions. Um, there are fewer than 10 years left to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And our cultural sector can play a critical role in supporting the achievement of these. In fact, every one of us as individuals can. I wish to start by saying that I'm zooming in from the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, otherwise known as Ottawa-Gatineau. And Arts Consultants Canada acknowledges that our association and its members work on the traditional territories of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from coast to coast to coast, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We honor their long history of welcoming many other peoples to this beautiful territory, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work here. We fervently believe that the arts contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey that we all share together. Allow me to introduce our guest. Paolo Granata is Associate Professor in Book and Media Studies at St. Michael's College at the University of Toronto. As an educator, an innovator, and a cross-disciplinary media scholar, nurtured by the centuries-old tradition of his alma mater, the University of Bologna, his research and teaching interests lie broadly in the areas of media ecology, media ethics, semiotics, print culture, and visual studies. Since 2018, he's been serving as a board member of the executive committee of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and his advocacy efforts are focused on digital equity, digital sustainability, and to explore the potential that information and communication technologies hold for enacting positive social change. He is chair of the Culture for SDGs initiative released last fall and sponsored by the Commission for UNESCO. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Paolo. Um, I had the opportunity to hear him make this presentation to the SCALE network, which is the climate change network in Canada for culture. And I was so impressed that I went, oh boy, we need to help spread the word. So thank you, and over to you, Paolo.
Thank you, Vittoria. Thank you for this kind of invitation. Je parle en français de bricolage et alors je parle anglais. And actually, I'm Italian. I'm 100% Italian. That's why I speak English with a perfect Italian accent. So I wanted to thank again Victoria for this invitation. I wanted to thank Jennifer and Maurizio behind the scenes that are facilitating this online meeting. And most importantly, I wanted to thank you all for showing up. The beauty of a Zoom meeting is that you can see the names. So I wanted to say hi to Agnese, Sam, Jane, Sarah, Cassandra, Dance Arts Institute, and David, Megan, Roxanne, Bridget, Catherine, Jenny, Robert, I'm skipping someone, Jude, Barbara, Zainib, and so thank you everyone. So absolutely, it's a great pleasure to share what's the toolkit, the SDG toolkit, culture for SDGs toolkit. And I wanted to announce that after my presentation, there will be an opportunity to open up the floor to conversation, dialogue, questions, sharing experiences. So it's very, very important that we can take advantage of this opportunity, not just as a presentation, but as a community building exercise. That's why I wanted to read aloud your names and welcome you all into this very meeting, but also, let's say, an exchange of ideas, right? I will start up sharing my ideas and the toolkit in particular. But again, feel free to step in anytime. I mean, using the chat, you can start typing your questions, or at the end of my presentation, we can give you the floor for questions, sharing experiences, and so on. Okay, so let's make it engaging and interacting. And I'm gonna test your if you were attentive. So say something on the chat, or maybe you can use the reaction on Zoom, like a thumb up. Okay, so just let me know that you are there. Okay, I see Roxanne, I see Sarah, Megan, wonderful. We learned something after a few years of pandemics. Eventually, we learned how to do it. Wonderful, wonderful. So it's very nice. So I can hear you, I can see you, I can feel that we are all on the same page. So thank you everyone for thumbing up. And so I think it's time to get started. So again, thank you for your participation, active and proactive participation in today's meeting and hopefully even beyond, because this toolkit is not just an initiative of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. It's something that really involves all of us, so we can all play an important role in this endeavor. And so I'll start sharing my screen. Here we go. I think you will see you will see a slide now in this moment perfectly. I'm going to disappear for a while. And actually, here you see that I'm back in this form. Hello, 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 everyone. So on my left, on my right, actually, you see the Culture for SDGs Toolkit. So just to give you a few coordinates, this is essentially a toolkit developed by the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. The toolkit is available online for you to download, cultureforsdgs.ca. The French version is in development, I've been already translated. The design version will be soon available. So that's for your reference. The cultureforsdgs.ca, a practical guide to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly, I will say, for cultural and heritage organizations in Canada. So there are many initiatives all across the world, fortunately, to boost the Agenda 2030, to involve organizations of all kinds in order to advancing SDGs in their operations. So at the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, we wanted to create something more practical, and that's the first goal, and something more local. Let's say by local, we mean Canada. And okay. And in this way, we can make a practical change, foster practical change in the very local place we live in. So we wanted to create something more locally oriented than a generic toolkit on SDGs. And so that's the very first point, something very practical and something that is locally based. So thinking of the Canadian country. So Sam is asking, I have a little service. Will be this posted online? Yes, this lecture, this talk, this meeting is being recorded and will be available online on YouTube after the meeting. So if you at some point have to leave or you have troubles with connections and everything, so this conversation is being recorded, so for you to review. And most importantly, don't forget to review the cultureforsdgs.ca website. And so we created this toolkit particularly to ensure that Canada's culture sector is at the front lines and can play an integral strategic role in helping the world achieving the global agenda, the Agenda 2030. So we wanted to really foster and help the Canada's culture sector achieving the global agenda. So I'll tell you a bit of the context within which this toolkit has been developed. So the first context is that this past September, essentially, we launched the toolkit in a very important meeting. I think that was an historical moment for the entire global family, particularly in the field of culture and arts, the culture sector. Because as you can see from this slide, in Mexico City in September, at the end of September, took place an historical UNESCO culture meeting. It's called Mondiacult. The same meeting took place 40 years ago. 40 years ago, the UNESCO developed and released an important declaration on cultural policies, on cultural for cultural organizations all across the world. After 40 years, they wanted to reconvey more than 150 countries represented and culture ministries from all the world coming to Mexico City to sign a new resolution. The resolution has been signed eventually to conceive culture as a public good, culture and the strategic value of culture to make the world a better place. So that was, again, an historical moment. So I was there along with the Canadian delegation. And it was one of the moments where you can really feel that the human family is one family, right? What I told you, people from all across the world aligned to the same goals. Not only the Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but most importantly, aligned on finding culture, right? And finding in culture that strategic value to foster and let people and make people thrive. And so, in order to share a bit of the atmosphere, the climate that we were able to enjoy in Mexico City, I'll show you a very, very short clip, a video clip, where you can actually get a sense on the meeting, the UNESCO Mondial Cult meeting in Mexico City, September 2022. Enjoy just a few minutes.
Mondial Cult 2022.
La cultura es la esperanza de la humanidad.
La cultura sea considerado un bien público global.
Que viva la cultura, muchas gracias, y queda clausurada esta conferencia Mondial Cult México 2022. Gracias a todas y a todos.
Viva la cultura, viva la cultura. I still feel the emotions of that historical meeting. And by the way, you may have noticed the United States flag, actually. And well, the good news is that United States are coming back to UN and UNESCO as well, so as a permanent member. So that's why in Mondial Culture they were just represented but not acting to sign the resolution. So the good news is that the United States are coming back into UN. What you see in this slide is that eventually we, during Mondial Culture, we presented the toolkit reflecting on the role of culture within the global agenda, the 17 goals. So what's important is that we teamed up with other stakeholders in the field, particularly to point out the role of culture within the 17 goals. So if you review the 17 goals, you can really get a sense of all aspects of society entirely covered. So the 17 global goals are really able to achieve all the needs of our current society, our planet, adopted in 2015, and as a global effort, of course, to build a more sustainable world. However, if you review the 17 goals, you may find that there is no goal dedicated to culture, right? There is no goal expressly dedicated to culture. So that's why within the operators in the field of culture and arts, since the agenda was launched in 2015, some cultural operators, policymakers, and so on, started, well, let's say, complaining of this missing goal, right? The culture goal. However, if you again, if you review the 17 goals, even if there is no mention, specific reference to culture, we can essentially, after reviewing the 17 goals and targets, there are 169 targets that make up these goals, about 10 targets each goal. If we review all the targets that are more specific in terms of the actual actions to achieve the goals, where we can actually find the references to culture. So that's why our goal was to point out the role of culture within the 17 goals, even if culture is not mentioned as a specific goal, right? Even if there are little references to culture all across the goals. So we wanted to, again, put together all the references, all the particular actions that are relevant, right, in terms of cultural strategies and cultural actions. That's why, for instance, in Mexico City, we teamed up with the Culture 2030 Goal, which is an organization that since 2013 started essentially advocating for a specific goal within the culture, within the global agenda, the 17 goals. So they say that, again, instead of just advocating for another goal. So now the agenda is done. 2030 is around the corner. So we entered actually into the decade of action. So now with a few years ahead, so it's time to actually speed up our efforts. Again, while teaming up with this organization that is particularly keen to, for the next agenda, the next global agenda, include culture as a special goal, I told you we wanted to essentially find a way to highlight the role of culture within the existing 17 goals, And so, in particular, when we launched the toolkit, we wanted to address all the possible goals that align, in particular the targets that align to our strategies. And so that's why eventually we created the toolkit, Culture for SDGs Toolkit. As Victoria mentioned at the very beginning, so this is an initiative of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO started advocating for the need of culture as a strategic factor for sustainable development. Back in 2019, before COVID, we started fostering dialogue and debates involving cultural operators. In Ottawa, we hosted a very important meeting with stakeholders in the field in order to reflect on how to highlight the role of culture within the global agenda. So that's why the Canadian Commission for UNESCO decided to create a working group. And so I had the pleasure of chairing this working group in order to create something practical, something tangible, right? And speed up the agenda on applying the cultural policies to SDGs. So here you see the toolkit. This is how we started working on the toolkit in the pandemic times. So essentially, we worked online, so via Zoom, using different collaborative tools. So it was challenging, right, during the global pandemic to keep working together remotely and so on. So you see, for instance, here on the right, on the left actually, so you see the Miro board where collaboratively we started working together, identifying the possible outcomes for this toolkit. And so it was challenging but very compelling. Firstly, because the working group was very diverse in nature. We have youth, we have representatives of the indigenous communities, experts in the field, practitioners, professionals, scholars. So the Canadian Commission for UNESCO wanted to put together a very diverse group of people in order to design, in order to envision, right, a practical tool, as I told you, a practical outcome for advancing the SDGs through cultural sector. And so this is how we started, and then eventually this is how we ended up. So a toolkit, which is a PDF downloadable on cultureforsdgs.ca, and it is intended as a practical guide. Let's dive into it. Let's see how we can actually work on it. So that's the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. So you see how the working group was diverse in nature, so with different representatives. And so three main aspects, three main pillars of this toolkit. So firstly, I told you, it's based on Canada. So we wanted to not overlap or not duplicate similar initiatives that already exist all across the world. So if you Google and if you search up for SDGs, toolkits, practical guides, and things like that, you will find dozens of materials available for them. We wanted to create something very specific for the Canadian culture sector, for the Canadian context, and particularly with three goals. Firstly, providing a roadmap. So we realized that many organizations, and I bet even some of your organizations, if you are part of a cultural organization, it's likely that your organization is already doing well in fostering the culture agenda, the 2030 agenda, and particularly culture as a strategic factor for sustainable development. And so we wanted to provide a practical agenda, practical roadmap for those organizations who are already doing well. And so I hope your organizations fall under this category. However, some organizations are doing well, but they are not aware of the fact that their operations actually align or can align to the 2030 agenda. And so the second goal is raising awareness about, again, the possibilities of acting in consistency and in coherence with the global agenda, finding connections between the 17 goals and maybe in particular a few goals I'll tell you later, and a few specific targets. So to have a practical roadmap and to have a practical set of actions to move on, a practical set of actions in order to gather and raise awareness. The third goal is to share good practices. So essentially, because many organizations are already doing well, or organizations will start advancing SDGs in a practical way, so aligning their operations to SDGs, essentially, it's an opportunity, this toolkit, to share the good practices, to share the best practices, to share what's going on. Because we believe that this is not just an initiative, a toolkit developed for organizations. It's a bottom-up kind of enterprise. So we really believe that organizations can make a difference, not only in advancing SDGs through their operations, but also sharing good practices that can inspire other organizations, can inspire to take tangible actions. And so we really rely on, we believe that organizations, by sharing the good practices, can foster awareness, can better create globally this kind of initiative. And so these are our three main goals for the toolkit. That said, there's another particular aspect that made our toolkit unique, particularly in comparison to other similar initiatives all across the world or generic initiatives about the SDGs. So if you review the 17 goals and the 169 targets, you may find little references to the heritage of the indigenous culture. And so, because we're in Canada, we wanted to actually give the example on how to integrate the process of reconciliation within the cultural practices and policies. Essentially, in our toolkit, there is a special focus on reconciliation in Canada, a special focus on using cultural policies and conceiving culture as a trade union, conceiving culture as a springboard for boosting the process of reconciliation, for integrating indigenous culture and indigenous people's culture within the global agenda, within the cultural policies in Canada. That's, I think, one of the unique signature features of this toolkit that is not only focused on Canada, but also focused on valuing the heritage, the history of the indigenous people of Canada. And this is actually something that is already integrated in the Canada's government, Canada's 2030 Agenda National Strategy. So if you check online, you should be able to find this milestone document created by the government of Canada in order to align Canada in general to the actual 2030 agenda. So in the national strategy, you can see actually many initiatives that aim at integrating indigenous people and their culture within the broader cultural sector in Canada. That's fundamental. I think this is something that really makes this toolkit unique and makes the actual tangible value of this toolkit more meaningful, right? Particularly in the Canadian society, particularly in our country. And so that's something that makes, again, this toolkit unique and makes it even more relevant, right? In the way we conceive culture. I take for granted, so what do we mean by culture? However, if we start a discussion, okay, what do we mean by culture? So it's a very broad term. Of course, we stick on the very idea of culture under the banner of UNESCO as a way to really foster the diversity of all people that are involved in our organizations. And so I think later we will discuss more, but for now, what's important is that we acknowledge that in fostering the Agenda 2030 for culture in Canada, it's necessarily and absolutely relevant to involve the indigenous people's culture. And so the roadmap, I told you, as a roadmap, we wanted to create something very tangible, very practical. We created practical ideas on how to align your cultural organization to the SDG and particularly to some goals. So essentially, if you want to start up, right, to the very first steps in order to align your organization to SDGs, or if some of you is a consultant in the field of culture and cultural policies, that might be a very good practical way to proceed. As a consultant, you may advise your cultural organization, or if you are running a cultural organization of some kind, you may start essentially undertaking those steps that we think are very practical to proceed on. For instance, talk start the conversation internally within the organization, and start reflecting on the role that that organization should play in advancing SDGs, right? And so talking is the first step as a way to, again, asking how much do people know about the SDGs in our organization, for instance. We don't take for granted that all cultural operators, all strategic figures in your organizations already know about the SDGs. And so starting the conversation, start talking about the SDGs is a very important talk, including maybe identifying a specific division in your organization, a specific person in your organization, a specific office that can be particularly interested in, again, taking this toolkit and make it as a practical way to proceed. And so we believe in the value of conversation. We believe in the value of talking in order to involving. And so the first step is talking. The second step is look. So, for instance, you can review what your organization is doing in the field by maybe identifying the existing intersections with the SDGs and your organization. Is there, for instance, a specific SDG out of 17 SDGs? Is there a specific SDG that can be relevant to your organization? I'll give you an example. SDG number 4 is about education. So maybe your organization is particularly sensitive to educational activities, for involving schools, involving students. So if your organization is already working in the field of educational activities, right? SDG number 4 may be particularly relevant to your organization. So that's why essentially we conceived the toolkit. So a practical way to connect what your organization is doing to the SDGs. And so looking at what your organization is doing. What work is currently happening in your community to advance SDGs? That's even particularly importantly. Why? Because essentially any organization is one with its community, right? So if your organization is part of a specific community, you can start asking, okay, which SDGs are relevant to our community? For instance, another crucial SDG is about gender equality, or equity. So you may find that those values and those SDGs are particularly relevant not only to your organization, but to your community, the reference of your community. So that's, I think, particularly important to foster this strategic vision. Not only thinking internally, right, in terms of your organization, but also externally in terms of your community. That's very important. And the first step, well, they're not necessarily in sequence, but the first step is to connect. So eventually extending the network of partners, extending the network of your community, and identifying possible external stakeholders that are relevant to the SDGs that you are taking into account. And so, for instance, how can you work together to achieve SDGs along with stakeholders? Or how can you identify new stakeholders that are interested in the SDGs you want to pursue in particular? And so, again, this kind of strategic partnerships really provide a sense of using SDGs as a way to connect people, to connect communities, involve stakeholders, and definitely creating that kind of community building exercise that is really the core operation for advancing SDGs. So no organization can make this important endeavor alone, right? So we really believe it, and I think this is part of the SDGs global agenda mindset, right, to foster partnerships and communities engagement. Not by chance, remember, SDG number 17, the last one, is titled partnerships. So SDG number 17 is dedicated to partnership. So without partnership, we cannot achieve SDGs, all the other 16 SDGs. So without that kind of, let's say, holistic vision, right? Without that kind of systemic vision, we cannot achieve the SDGs. So that's why there is an SDG number 17 that is expressly dedicated to fostering partnerships in order to achieve the goals. So in the same way, with the same spirit of SDG number 17, partnership, in your organization, you can essentially foster this kind of community building exercise. You can identify the best partners that can be great allies for your endeavor, right? So again, this is the first steps: talk, look, and connect, that we believe are strategic in order to start up, right, the process of aligning your organization to SDGs. Then, if you want to take it to a next level, so higher in the bar, so on top you see 3 more steps: organize, team up, and boost. Organize, it means that if your organization wants to seriously take into account the possibility of integrating SDGs within the day-by-day operation of your organization, that must be done strategically, but also structurally. So the SDG agenda must be integrated in the structure of your organization. I'll give you later a few examples, but essentially you can reviewing the SDGs using the toolkit to see how the SDGs can inform the way your organization is structured, is organized, right? So that's very, very important. Otherwise, many initiatives in SDGs tend to become just a kind of a one-time experience, right? So there is no continuity and there is no ongoing effort. If you want to really make the SDGs like an ongoing effort in your organization, SDGs must be integrated operationally or strategically within the very organization, the way your organization is organized, is structured. That's very, very important. Secondly, teaming up, I mentioned already how important it is to connect and so on. But again, the SDGs are an important opportunity for creating new connections, creating that kind of network that really supports your effort. And secondly, boosting means that you don't not only your organization not only acts consistently in advancing SDGs within your organization, but you can be a champion, right, of this. You can help other organizations. You can advocate for integrating SDGs in cultural policies. You can share your good practices, even using our toolkit, distributing our toolkit. So we believe that in this sense, communication is key in order to really help other organizations to align. And so I think this is just a summary of these first steps: talk, look, and connect, organize, team up, and boost. In the toolkit, you may be able to dig deeper into these operational steps. But again, as a starting point, we believe that this can be a very practical roadmap in order to, again, align your organization to SDGs. Then, very important, there are 17 SDGs. Of course, they are all important, all relevant to foster social change in any aspect of society. I was mentioning that culture has no goal. I mean, there is no goal dedicated to culture. And I was mentioning that there are a few references to culture in the overall global agenda. And so we wanted to highlight particularly 7 goals out of 17 that are mostly relevant to cultural policies. So without, again, overloading you the user of the toolkit with so much information, we wanted to, again, summarize, but also select, filter, let's say, the most relevant targets, the most relevant goals, in order to, again, boost and speed up the process of using this toolkit, aligning your organization with the SDGs. So not only we selected 7 most relevant goals, but also we selected 18 targets. I was mentioning before, that's very important. At a first glance, these goals seem very broad in nature. These goals seem, well, almost impossible to achieve in such a short span of time. So until 2030 is around the corner, 7 years. So this is a common feeling, right? If you just think of the goal. However, if you dig deeper and narrow it down to the targets, targets are way more specific. Targets really provide you with a practical way to proceed. Because for each target, there are indicators. The indicators help to measure our efforts. The indicators help to constantly monitor the state of art of each specific action within the frame of that specific goal and within the framework of the global goals. So that's why don't be, again, frustrated, discouraged, right? If you find the goals so broad in nature. The targets will give you a very practical way to proceed, okay? That's why eventually we selected 7 goals, we selected 18 targets, and then we came up with 43 practical actions. So if you're short of ideas, if you still think that after reviewing the SDGs, after reviewing the targets, you still are unclear on how to proceed, right, there are 43 practical actions that can be undertaken in your organization, okay? So this is, again, another way to take this toolkit as a tangible way to proceed. Let me just mention the 7 goals that we selected. I was mentioning the quality of education. That's an important goal. Again, if your organization is doing well already or is planning to do something in the field of education, in the field of using art for schools of all ranks, or educational activities of some kind, and so on, goal number 4, the quality of education, may be very relevant to your scope. Decent work and economic growth. So many organizations, particularly not only non-profit, but also profit, but also organizations dealing with maybe creators of some kinds, or the actual cultural industries, where there is a direct impact on the actual economic sector. And so that's another important goal to take into account. That goal will give you guidelines, will give you ideas, will give you the framework on how to foster economic growth in a sustainable way. And so how we can consider culture as a strategic factor for a sustainable economic growth. So plenty of ideas in that goal number 8, particularly if you are in the field of, again, creative industries, creation, and so far. Number 10, inequalities, reducing inequalities. And so if your organization deals with underrepresented communities, marginalized communities, and if your goal is to use the SDGs within that scope, so reviewing the SDG number 10 may be particularly relevant, because under SDG number 10 essentially gives you the framework for, again, taking into account strategies and practical actions. Remember the targets, okay? Don't just stop at the goals. Remember the targets. Targets will give you practical ways to proceed. Now, if your organization is acting within a major city like Toronto, for instance, or Ottawa or Montreal, goal number 11 may be particularly relevant to you because essentially goal number 11 is focused on the role of urban communities, right, as a community to advancing SDGs. And so what kind of actions can be taken into account in the urban areas? However, if you pay attention to the actual title, it's not just cities, but also communities. So there are references in the global goal number 11, not only relevant to the major cities of Canada, but also how to essentially foster the value of communities, even the rural community, even the countryside communities in the very scope of the Agenda 2030. Then 12 and 13 are mostly focused on sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability. Let me just say a few words on this. Usually there is a misconception about the SDGs. Sometimes people think that SDGs, sustainable development, means only environmental sustainable development. It means that it seems that everything is all about climate emergency or environmental policies in order to create a more sustainable way of living. Of course, environmental sustainability is crucial and central in the framework of the global agenda. However, the SDGs are not all about environmental sustainability. SDGs are about sustainability in general. And so it's very important that we use the very word sustainability in a broader sense. And in fact, sustainable development goals cover all aspects of society, not just the environmental sustainability. Okay. But that said, there are, of course, two goals that are particularly and relevant. Firstly, number 12, to foster responsible consumption and production. So in our day-to-day operational and organization of our cultural sector, we can do more in order to align to sustainable consumption and production policies and more in a more responsible way. And so there you will find practical advices. If you're as a big organization, or if you have to advise an organization in order to align with the environmental and sustainable practices, goal number 12 is strategic. Same like goal number 13, that is mostly focused on the climate action. So we call it climate emergency, not just climate change. We call it climate emergency because this is an emergency. And so there are many actions that can raise awareness, that can create the culture of conceiving planet as part of the human family, right? Not just as a separate entity. And then a final mention to the goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So we believe that the healthy society needs healthy democratic institutions, democratic organizations, in order to really foster that and create a stronger civic fabric, right, to support culture in any sector. And so you will find that many initiatives aligned to the cultural sector fall under the goal number 16. And so here you see some examples. Then I will invite you to review the toolkit. Examples on how each goal has been highlighted and presented in the toolkit. For instance, goal number 4, quality of education. So you will see on top, for instance, a first important statement. How is culture relevant in this goal? In the goal, for instance, of quality education, so you will find why and how culture is relevant. Secondly, you will find what can the culture sector do, right? So in general, the culture sector can have a practical impact in this particular scope, the scope of quality education. And thirdly, which SDG targets have implications for the culture sector. And so here you will see that the range, selection of specific targets that are mostly relevant to that scope, in this case, goal number 4, education. And then on top, on the bottom, the second part, take action, you see those practical actions that we wanted to list in order to start the actual practical actions. And so that's the same for all goals. So for goal 4, 11, 13, 16, 8, 12, and 5, eventually you will see again why, how culture is relevant, the culture sector can do, what targets are relevant, and particularly the actions that you can take. It's very, very practical. Again, if you're short of ideas, that will give you the actual Kindle to start up the fire, okay? And then your organization will do the rest. To conclude, a very important, as I mentioned at the beginning, a very important component of this toolkit is the idea that we can create together what we call a community in action, culture for SDGs, community in action. So it's very important that, firstly, you can use this toolkit as a tool for self-assessment. So essentially, using this toolkit, you will start this process of self-assessment in order to evaluate the state of art of your organization and how your organization is aligning to SDGs. And so we believe that the self-assessment is a process of self-awareness in order to do better. Or if you're doing well already, is a way to really give what you are doing a better framework, right, in order to boost your current operations. And so we believe that the toolkit can be a perfect tool for initiating, so starting up the self-assessment. We invite this kind of self-assessment in order to essentially submit if your organization is already doing well, or in the near future, your organization will create an initiative that is relevant, right, to the toolkit. So we invite you to share this good practice. So to submit your self-assessment, your report of the specific initiative you have undertaken in order to be part. So we will help to view and showcase your good practices in order to, again, foster awareness, in order to share the good practices, in order to involve our communities, and most importantly, other stakeholders and organizations in the field. So we believe that, again, you can be the best champions of this initiative, right? So, in practically advancing not only SDGs in your organizations, but helping achieve the real objective of this toolkit, which is making cultural organizations in Canada more active in the field of SDGs. And so get involved. So we really count on your participation, becoming part of this network of cultural and heritage organizations that are doing well in Canada, right, in order to encourage others in the culture sector to do the same. For instance, just as an example, and then I'll open up the floor to discussion. Just as an example, so I was mentioning the field of education, global goal number 4. Here you see, for instance, in Toronto, the ACCA Foundation Canada developed very, very helpful, useful resources that align to SDGs and essentially was presenting the resources of the museum, the ACCA Museum, and the organization, resources for educators in order to essentially present the heritage of the ACCA Foundation using SDGs, and vice versa, using SDGs to somehow better present the institutions that are part of this particular foundation. So again, if you check out the initiative undertaken by the ACCA Foundation in Canada, you will find that they were able to integrate their workshops, school initiatives, educational initiatives, where mm, each sector of their museum, each resource of their museum is aligned to specific goals. So essentially, by presenting their activities, they foster the SDG culture. They foster the idea that SDGs are one with cultural policies, right? So I think this is particularly relevant to, again, get a sense on how, particularly in the field of education, how a cultural organization can do a practical activity to align cultural operations to SDGs. Let's say that, again, there's the website. The French version is coming soon, hopefully. There's the website, cultureforsdgs.ca. And well, if you think you are already aligning to, or if you think you're ready to start spreading the word, you're also invited to use our hashtag, so culture for SDGs. And so the hashtag will help somehow spread the word on social media. So I'll stop here for now. So I hope the presentation was exhaustive to present so the scope of this toolkit. And now I think Victoria will help me to open up the floor for conversation, your questions, your comments, and so I'm all ears.
Great. Thank you so much, Paolo. It's absolutely wonderful to have a toolkit like this for us to be able to use. I think we all would embrace the spirit of the SDGs, but the challenge is then how do we actually put them into action? And so just to remind everybody, it's available on the Canada Center for UNESCO website. The download is there, available in English. The French has been a little bit delayed, I gather, because of graphic formatting or something like that. But it's there. Download it, see what it means for your organization. So anybody have questions for Paolo? You can just raise your hand. Or you could
type
put a message in the chat as well. It's fine.
Exactly. All right.
You're getting a bunch of thank yous here. Okay. Yeah, if there's no questions, that's fine. But to me, what I love is the practicality of this, Paolo, that we can actually go into this toolkit and figure out how to use it for our own organizations or the clients that we work with. I mean, your audience are largely consultants, so this was open to anyone who wanted to join. And for us to figure out how to learn about the toolkit and then how we could maybe help our clients and our own practice. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Taking a look at even the question of decolonization. We did a webinar several months ago, and we had a conversation about how do we decolonize our own practice. So looking at SDGs for our own consulting practice, how are the choices that each of us are making as individual professionals?
Absolutely. And let me say, from the consultant standpoint, SDG, the global agenda in general, the toolkit in particular, they really give you a consistent, holistic framework. Within this framework, everything is consistent. All the goals and targets are actually linked to each other. They are not just 17 separate goals. So you cannot achieve one goal, right? If you don't achieve the other goals. So your clients will see how this framework is consistent, well aligned, all the goals aligned each other, the targets sometimes overlapping and aligning each other. So I think that consistency and the holism of this framework is one of the most really powerful strategic tool, right? That can be used because everything is consistent within this global framework. And consistency, I think, is the key for a good advice, is the key for consultation, is the key for an organization to proceed on. So the consistency of the global agenda in particular, and then using the toolkit will be a great asset, I think, for your work as consultants.
Yeah, and that's a big thank you to you and your committee. You actually had quite a large number of people working with you. You shared the list with us, but I think that a lot of thought went into this. And we do have a question in the chat.
Right.
Yeah, so here's Jane Sadler asking, without culture as a specific sector, how do we report together and measure success? I think that's a great question, Jane. Thank you.
Just 1 second. Mm,
You see that question? It's without culture as a specific sector, how do
oh,
we
right,
report
right.
together and measure success?
Absolutely. So firstly, the community in action that is associated to this toolkit is intended exactly to do what you said, Jade. So the idea that uh, organizations can report what they are doing. So we put all together, we share the reports, we share the good practices, and so this is, I think, the first step to measure our successful way of acting and thinking. So the community in action aims at doing exactly what you said. So reporting together and essentially providing a range of good practices. Also, the indicators, the Agenda 2030 provides the indicators. Indicators essentially give you a practical way to measure your success. So if you review the indicators, you will find practical ways for assessing and evaluating, in particular, how your organization is doing. But again, as in terms of reporting together, this is why the Canadian Commission for UNESCO wanted to launch this kind of Canadian initiatives to really bring together different cultural operators. So thank you, Jane. I hope I addressed your questions. And I think there are other questions.
Yeah, there's another question here for the education piece with clients. Can you recommend any key brief reference materials that explain the SDGs? I guess that question, Amy Calder, that question would be explaining all of the SDGs in context. And then, of course, this document starts to frame it through culture.
Absolutely.
Says yes, exactly. Okay.
But just 1 second, I wanted to give you a sense on how the toolkit is practical. So if you go on the second last page, resources, instead of putting dozens and dozens of links that maybe will overwhelm you all. So you may be able to see my screen. Here you see resources. You have practical links, for instance, SDGs, UN, the cultural agenda, a few links that really give you the at a glance sense of SDGs, what are SDGs, and then in particular, in the field of culture. So I was mentioning the Agenda 21 culture, global goals. I think the most at a glance links are the globalgoals.org. Definitely, it's really easy to navigate. And the SDGs.UN, which is the official website. But then again, so check out page number 19 of our toolkit. Without overwhelming you with too many resources, we selected, let's say, the most juicy pieces to start with.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Paolo? So thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us today for what I think is an extremely important topic and a practical tool to help us work with our clients and our businesses to play our role in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. I certainly am very inspired by this, so I want to say thank you very much. And yes, we have recorded it and it will shortly be up on our YouTube channel if you want to listen again. We'll also make sure that everyone has a copy of the link to the Culture for SDGs Toolkit. Thank you, Paolo. It's been a
Bye.
pleasure meeting with you and working with you on this.
Thank you, Vittoria. Thank you very much, Agnese, Jade, Sarah, Megan, Amy, Zainab, Kate. Thank you all for staying with us. And looking forward to hearing from you. Feel free to reach out. Feel free to get in touch with the toolkit. There is an email address. So best of luck with your organizations. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.